All right, ladies and gentlemen, dear participants of the DigiHealthDay 2022, both on site and online. First of all, I would like to thank you all for being with us up until this moment. This is the last part of the quite busy day. We're happy to see such an incredible attendance on site and online, despite the fact that it's getting already dark here in Pakistan and it's getting foggy. And I just saw that it's the exact weather, you know, for a discussion on artificial intelligence in healthcare. So on that, I would like to launch our panel discussion. We titled it this year, DigiHealth AI Quo Vadis. How do we make healthcare AI safe, efficient, ethical, explainable, and accountable? So we will be speaking about quite a few questions addressing mostly the policy, regulation, ethics, and R&D perspectives of artificial intelligence in healthcare. We all know that without AI, digital health would probably make even little sense in the near future, because we're just generating such huge amount of data that, as we always say, to handle all that data without advanced computing approaches, without algorithms, without AI, would definitely not be possible. And I'm super excited and happy to share this panel and to invite now to join the panel our colleagues, Professor Rajendra Gupta from India. Rajendra, welcome to the panel. Thank you again for being with us. Professor Anne Snowden from Canada. Professor Snowden, thanks for being with us. And we would like to introduce also two other panelists whom you, ladies and gentlemen, are meeting for the first time today at the DigiHealth Day. Those are Professor Martin Gerdes from University of Agder in Norway. And Mr. Dmitry Etin from Oracle, joining us from Austria. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to, as we promised, to make it interactive, which means that we are happy to take questions from the audience, right? From each and every one of you. And it's going to be, we would like to have actually more questions from the audience than perhaps even from a moderator. But to set the stage, I will now invite each of our panelists to provide a quick introduction, to probably present themselves in a few words and what they are mostly focusing on. And at the same time, I would like each of you, dear panelists, dear lady and gentlemen, to answer immediately one question. What do you think is the most important prerequisite for healthcare AI to essentially to take off and to fulfill its promise? Would you like to start, Professor Snowden? And I don't know what is the courtesy in panel discussions, rather lady first or lady last, but let's start with you. Thank you very much.
It depends on how you want to manage the panel, but thank you so much. As I think I spoke earlier today, most of my research has focused on what's the role of digital health in advancing health system performance, very much focused on outcomes. What is it that it is achieving? What are those ways of measuring what's relevant and sensitive to digital health advancement, and what is completely not linked to digital transformation? In terms of AI, I actually have built a number of AI algorithms since way too long ago, before AI was even really that mainstream. And the single most critical prerequisite for a successful algorithm is the accuracy and representation and standardization of the data. AI models will do all kinds of wonderful things, but if you put in data that's biased, represents only one group of a part of a population, or it's just missing critical variables, then your algorithm will predict absolutely nothing. So I think really the fundamental challenge we have in healthcare for AI particularly is the precision and the representation of data.
Thank you very much for your comments. Professor Gupta, you're coming from a lot of policy, you're doing a lot of policy development. So from policy perspectives, I think we all understand that it's absolutely critical. What would be a prerequisite from policy perspective for AI to really be safe and efficient, please?
Firstly, I'll put my disclaimer that at this hour, my real intelligence also doesn't work. So I'm not sure if artificial intelligence I can answer. It's as foggy as you see outside. But having said that, you know, my biggest worry about AI has been, see, AI has to be looked from different standpoints in healthcare. On the diagnosis, on the reading of the scans and X-rays, perfect, no problem. I think we are good to go. But the moment you talk about prescriptions, the moment you talk about the diagnosis based on the real, data, I have an issue. And I would put it in this way, like I think Professor Snowden talked about the bias. I would talk about the basis. And I call it the 3 I's of data. The first is the integrity of data. Second is the integration. When you don't have these 3, you can't apply intelligence. That's the 3rd I. Having said that, now look at a case of certain countries where if a doctor prescribes you 3 antibiotics for a fever, what will you do if you apply AI algorithms on that data? What will it throw out to you? So I think as a policymaker, I look at first have baseline. We are still years away, I must say that, because we need to have case management protocols, a practice built on case management protocols, at least for the next 5 years. If you apply data on that, so the malpractices of healthcare don't show up in the data. So when you apply AI, it will actually be intelligence. But till then, I would say I would not be very comfortable, because the data that you have is the malpractice data. Any amount of intelligence you apply will throw you out garbage. So that's my worry. And that shows up with what's going on in this field. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Professor Gerdes, you're also in academia, Martin. And we know that you're conducting also some research in relation. I mean, we're actually now doing a joint research in relation to specifically bias in AI and a link to AI ethics. So from, let's say, from developer perspective and from technology perspective, could you enlighten us a little bit more? I mean, how do we really address it? How can we make that, how can we move forward with that problem of data bias?
Yep. First, I would like really to look at the prerequisite of doing research around health AI. So that really means, I mean, research around the development of algorithms for decision support, which makes use of AI. Yeah, so and this needs data. Yeah, so simply the pure research with AI, so not talking about the primary use of personal patient data, but the secondary use for research around health AI, that needs data. So in a way that I see actually as one of the most demanding challenges currently around health AI, that is really the availability of data. The underlying, in a way, problem for that, I think, is that we need a governance framework for that, like a legislative framework for the secure and privacy protecting and also ethical use of personal and person-generated data. So we need, in a way, legal security for those that provide data, which is all of us, in a way. Yeah. So in a way, our privacy, when we give data for secondary use, our privacy must be protected. Yeah, that must be ensured. And also on the other side, the researchers themselves, whatever data they use, whatever in a way they come up with, that must also be legally ensured. Yeah. So that is one thing. Yeah, the governance for secondary use of health data. The other one is what I think is the education side. And that's, I mean, what I also represent, like coming from a university. So we need in a way multidisciplinary education around health AI. And this is not really, it's not only the technological side. So it's not just the AI researchers. It's also in a way the health side. So those that eventually should make use of that, they have to understand actually how to make use of health AI. It also goes into social sciences and of course into the legislation. Yeah, so multidisciplinary research is another very important requirement.
Thank you very much. Dimitri, Mr. Etin, Dimitri, you're coming from the business side, from a company, and you worked with data. What is your perspective coming from more, yes, technology, one should say, and data management side? Because you also have two kind of faces, right? You work for a company, but you've been also active at different initiatives and NGOs. You can tell us probably a few more words. Yeah, what is your perspective?
Yes, so first of all, it's a real pleasure. And, you know, I'm really grateful to be invited and, you know, try to share a little bit of what we see, you know, so to say, from the practical standpoint, you know. So I've been working in the industry for software vendors, for system integrators for the last probably 15, 20 years. And before that, I worked for about half a dozen years in a hospital, you know, as an IT manager, as a CIO of a hospital. So I've always been trying to work with real solutions and implementing them in real life. And that kind of gives sort of like, on one hand, probably doesn't give a, you know, kind of a 1,000-foot view in terms of what's going on, you know, in the academia, in the policy making side. But on the other hand, it does provide perspective of, you know, an exact user. So what are the exact challenges that people are facing when they are trying to use technology? And on the other hand, as, you know, implementers, as project managers, as developers, what type of limitations and boundaries are there in front of us? So what we can't do for one or another reason, and those would be, you know, practical things. And we already started to kind of unfold those types of things, right? The data quality, the accessibility to data, data privacy and security. Those are, you know, on one hand, kind of legislative birds. On the other hand, those are technological birds, right? So what is that we can use in order to overcome one or another challenge? On the other hand, probably lately, I had the chance to sit in a couple of working groups which represent industry towards the policymakers. And that started especially, and that was already raised now, that started with the whole notion of European Health Union and the development of European health data space. And as you can understand, I mean, probably, again, I don't know whether that is obvious to, you know, the general public, but for us in industry here in Europe, it is obvious and how different it is. We operate here in Europe, for example, versus the operations in the United States, where business works very closely with policymakers. Sometimes it is called, you know, lobbying and meddling and all those sort of things, but still, it actually gives a shorter way and both way of communication and a better way to stay relevant, both for the policymakers and for the industry. Here on our side of, so here in the European Union, this is almost inexistent. There's no real forum and platform for industry to speak with policymakers, with the governments. This is so much restricted because of the anti-corruption and all different other things that industry is basically left behind in that sort of thing. So the voice of industry is inexistent, even though we kind of bring the practical challenges that we, you know, see from the real life. And then, you know, what would be our kind of, or my first take on this kind of opening question: what would it take to make AI work? What would it take us to see benefits from applying AI? And for me, that also kind of sits very closely is to the very practical term, what is implementable? And that is the major question I always ask myself when we start one or another project. Is there is a KPI out there, there is a clinical KPI or policymaking KPI, which tackles, I don't know, the length of stay, tackles the longevity of life. So there is a number of different things which are non-technical at all. So this is the key question here, is how we break it down, how we actually gonna take that policy KPI, legislative KPI, and try to apply technology there. So that is the whole process that is usually bridged really on a case-by-case basis. So really, literally, no one is teaching, you know, this whole ecosystem of people that have to take those decisions together. And that is probably the major obstacle, is to technology people to understand what they need to implement. And for them to be able to tell back, to provide feedback to people and tell them, to the policymakers, to the clinicians, to tell them, no, this is not implementable today. We just can't make it happen, right? So, and then that would be a more fair conversation in terms of whether it makes sense to take one tool or another tool, and whether that tool will be applicable to a particular problem that we want to try to resolve.
Thank you very much. So you touched on quite a few, in our opinion, in my opinion, and I guess everybody would agree with me, very important aspects of this, you know, this sort of technology. And you mentioned also regulation, Dmitry, and you compared the European Union to the United States and probably also to Asia. Is that the reason, do you think, that US and Asian giants are well ahead, let's put it that way, at this moment, compared to European Union with regards to commercialization of different digital health technology? What is the reason of that? Martin, do you think Europe over-regulates AI and over-regulates healthcare technology? What is your take on that?
No, I wouldn't really say so. I wouldn't really think it's over-regulation. I think the starting point, again, going back to one of the main requirements of health AI is the availability of data, of health data. And in the beginning, health data is per se is personal data. It is very crucial that this is privacy protected, yeah, in an ethical, legal way. But then, so we have GDPR, and I think also to biggest degree EHDS, so they focus on this primary use of health data and protect that. Now, I think the crucial step to make data available for secondary use, which is so crucial for health AI, is the depersonalization or anonymization of health data. And there are technologies for that, but I think this is exactly not regulated yet. So in a way, to find in the regulation a way of, well, generally accepted, legally accepted, a way that accepts that depersonalized data can be shared, can be used for health AI research, and eventually then also for the use of the results from that. So I wouldn't really say that we are in this aspect over-regulated. I think we need some clear legal framework, regulation and framework for the secondary use of health data.
Yeah, very important point. Indeed, the secondary, this is all about the secondary use, and we need basically rules of game. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, if there is already a question from the audience, please let us know. Or if we have question from, oh, of course, I knew that we have question from Sarah. Sarah, we will be addressing your question in a minute. If it is a question or comment, no, it's a question. So we mentioned, but in the very beginning, we spoke also about the quality of data. And what do you think? Now, what do we do? How do we essentially improve the quality? That is the problem we are going to face. That is a tremendous problem. I mean, we are already facing that problem. And as Rajendra said, you know, garbage in, garbage out. We would never be able to build, you know, reliable algorithms unless or until we solve data quality issue. Is that right? So what should we do for that? I mean, where are we there, and how we're moving there to make this artificial intelligence, so to say, indeed intelligent, right? It's going to be another question. How intelligent is artificial intelligence for today? Yes, Anne.
So I think all of these pieces are deeply integrated and related. We could solve data, but data to achieve what? What is it that a health system needs AI to solve? If right now it's heavily based in the research space, which is important, and the design and development of those algorithms is fundamental to a strong and productive and effective AI. But if health systems are not defining what that model needs to predict, then how would you be able to define what data you need to feed the model? And the other thing is, if you don't have industry at the table, which we most often don't, then how do we know that algorithm doesn't already exist somewhere? Healthcare has a really bad habit of reinventing the same wheel over and over again. And I see this in analytics all the time. But the moment you sit down with an AI research team, they are brilliant. They have no idea what you're trying to solve. And unless and until health systems decide we desperately need to advance X could.
Apologies.
He's hacking at him.
AI, that was an intervention of an algorithm.
Yes, that's right. Somebody was trying to predict when she will stop talking. Sorry. But I think part of this, a big part of this is the challenge. Well, I work extensively with AI researchers. The very first question, and they won't move off this question till you're critically clear. What are you trying to predict? And what data points do you need to accurately predict it? And even when you think you have all that, by the way, doesn't necessarily mean there's a challenge, but I think it's up to health systems to define what problem are we trying to solve. AI researchers are brilliant. They can create a lot of solutions that are looking for a problem to solve. And that is wonderful, and it can educate the market on what's possible, but I think that's where the gap is for me.
Thanks for that comment, and I think we've discussed similar things back at the meeting in Helsinki where we spoke about the capacity building, and I think I made a few comments there that indeed we need to somehow achieve better linkage, so to say, if not to say a merger, but better understanding between the tech specialists and the healthcare specialists. And that is basically exactly what we're trying to do here in our digital health program, right? I'm always telling you guys, you need to develop.
Oh, and that's so critical. And just for interest, we have been measuring DHI scores, digital capacity. Of those 4 dimensions I mentioned, analytics by far is the lowest. So the analytics scores I'm seeing out of 100, 8, 10, maybe as high as 20, that would be exceptional. And that gives you a sense of, compared to like governance, 60, 70 out of 100, or interoperability, 50, 60 out of 100, but analytics, almost nowhere. And it's because it requires that intersection of healthcare experts, clinicians, teams, and those AI, computer science, technology experts. And we don't naturally put them at the same table.
Thanks, excellent point. So we're going to read now the comment from Sarah. Among all challenges in applying digital health for wider coverage, I think the main challenge is trying to find a common language so everybody with any educational status can understand that. Because I think the first line targets are people, health seekers, and not only health professionals. So maybe trying to make this knowledge more visualized could be considered as a solution, in my opinion. Rajendra, what do you think? Should we be directing more knowledge sharing and engaging the people more in this process? Should we be explaining it better to the people? What would be your take on that? I'm wondering.
So first, I think still what you have asked all the questions are interconnected, very important. So I'll still like to add your regulation versus innovation. A very clear rule, which Damity will agree, that regulation kills innovation. Let's be very clear about it. But health is not something you cannot unregulate. So I think the answer
very
would lie.
Bold.
Yeah,
so regulation kills innovation. This is a bold statement. Thank you for that, Rajendra.
So there's a next.
It's getting interesting.
That gets to the next part of the statement is that
Right.
self-regulation is the answer. So let people self-regulate. That means industry, academia, the care seeker all need to be around the table to talk about what is the minimum threshold, what you need to do, and should data be a public good? You know, I think that we have still not arrived at the basic, and we are talking of the 3rd, 4th, and 5th floor of the building. So the foundation doesn't exist for now. And I'm really concerned because AI has become hope, hype, and, you know, which is a serious thing for me.
Harm for
So
you.
yeah, it will harm actually if you don't get to the basics. Now, should we visualize what? So the question is a what, where? So we need more discussions like this, but we need to understand that discussion should lead to action. So what are the action points? I'll be more interested in saying, first, if you really want to apply intelligence to data, get integrity of data, which means the data should be clean. It should be based on case management protocols. It should be across strata. It cannot be just a few section of people, their data you have taken, and you say, well, are we building AI?
Should be available, first of all.
Yes.
Let's begin with
yeah.
that. It should be.
So it should be available. You know, you have all state of people. So data is a public good to an extent. It is safe. You're going to use data to create an AI tool, test it, and it will keep evolving. So my worry is always at the starting point that is it a clean data or you have those 3 antibiotics for a fever. So the basis is still not answered. I think for me, anywhere, whether you talk of US, India, Africa, anywhere, we're still not arrived at the basics. And we are talking of AI can do many things, but where have we started? Or have we gone wrong? Very, very interesting case I think we all should discuss is when 4 years back, I said IBM Watson won't last. And IBM Watson was the answer to AI. I mean, everyone talking about IBM Watson, IBM, and they shut it down last year. Because the fact is you can have a big name like IBM going to everyone and saying, tie up with us, give us your data, we'll use. But what data were they getting is a question they should have asked. All hospitals, all large ones, they tied up, but what were hospitals doing? Overdiagnosis, overprescription, and not appropriate treatment. And at the end, the fate of IBM should not be the fate of AI. So that is a big, big call to action, a big, I think, moment of truth for all of us. And I'm sure that you had carefully thought when you put up this panel, you know, at this hour to make sure that we get those answers. So I am still, you know, thinking what are those starting points for getting data, getting the right data, getting data based on protocols, whether data is a public good. So I get entire population data to work for an AI tool. Otherwise, if he develops an AI tool, she develops an AI tool, he develops an AI tool, all 3 will get 3 differential diagnoses for 3 same ailments. Won't work for any one of us. So I'm more worried than happy.
You mentioned public good, Rajendra. Is data public good? Can it be? Can health data be a public good?
So the challenge here is that, as I said, we have overhyped. Everyone started talking data is the new oil. So if you create those kind of statements and the world moves around it, would you share oil? So the problem is that we try to overhype and then try to oversimplify. Today, no one is going to share. Ask people in the room, will you share your health data? No way. Do you want AI? Probably yes. Will it happen? No way.
We're going to ask everybody in the audience. How many of you, ladies and gentlemen, are ready to share your health data? Anonymized, obviously, pseudonymized. Wow. This is probably biased, although we should say, because there are, you know, digital health enthusiasts here in the room. Martin, you wanted to add something? Or, okay.
Yeah, well, I think I currently have at least 3 things in my mind that were brought up and that were flying around. I think that the smaller one was actually what you brought up, Georgi, that was around explainability. So should we explain AI, well, to the public? Actually, explainable AI is a big topic in research that addresses, for example, I mean, beyond others, but I mean, the concern in particular of medical, clinical professionals that simply do not accept to trust the black box. Yeah, so in a way, if there is an AI, like on technical terms, like some deep learning thing that just comes up out of more or less nowhere with the decision support, I mean, give this medicine or whatever, this is not accepted. Yeah, so medical professionals simply do not expect it. That means it has to be explained. Yeah. So, and that is perhaps just one example where in a way explanation of how an AI came to a certain decision is necessary, at least in the health space. Yeah, so I think that that was one of the topics. The next topic was, I think, around legislation, regulation. Yes, well, I think that the comment I would make is, well, so far it doesn't really work. Yeah, so simply we have this lack of data, at least for health AI research. So what is the reason for that, and how can this lack of data overcome? And I think one of the main reasons here is that we have a lack of really governance for secondary use. Yeah, and I don't really think that this in a way can be self-regulated. I would say that this can or should actually be regulated in a bottom-up approach. So basically all those, I mean, in a way, data providers, also researchers, and eventually, I mean, also industry that needs that, I mean, for the research, also for the use of it, they should sit together. Yeah, so it doesn't necessarily be a top-down regulation approach, but I think it needs to be sort of at least like a governance, so like a public regulation approach. And then I had, well, somewhat I think related to is health data, is it a public good? Well, I think first of all, health is a public good. Yeah, I think that we probably can all agree on. So correspondingly, I mean, whatever helps to, well, generate public health should be at least in public interest. That also means that data that supports health related research, also health AI research, then should be understood as a public good. And that brings me, I mean, to one thing actually I had here in my notes. This is now how to somewhat make it more, let's say, beneficial to provide data. So I think what is actually needed would be somehow like an economic framework for health data for secondary use. So like a funding or beneficiary platform that simply, well, is supported by the beneficiaries of health AI data, and in a way supports the provision and also the administration of that data. Yeah.
Interesting. Thank you. Dmitry, you wanted to? Oh, we have a question from the audience. Okay. No. Fantastic. Yes. We have a question from the audience. So please pass the microphone. In the meantime, there is one small question that we'd like to take afterwards. So what do you think in relation to that, you know, data sharing, data, let's call it data donation. Do we need patients, or do we need to have our patients or patients coming to a health clinic consent to providing their data, of course, with all the necessary precautions with regard to privacy, to use of AI? That would be a short question. Oscar, now you're oh, okay, from the audience. Okay.
Yes, I do have two questions. The first question is from the policy aspect. In the developing world, or the developed world, we are hearing right from policymakers, but is this backed by physical action? So in the aspect of the motivation, or do the policymakers have the motivation for AI? Because AI is going to fix some of the inefficiencies that is a revenue generation point for some of the policymakers. So are they actually motivated for these changes to occur? And then the second question is on the privacy of data connected to AI. Is there regulation and innovation regarding criminal reporting for AI? So for example, if you are using a wearable and it notices like increase in your adrenaline level and your blood pressure in specific locations, and because of the Internet of Things, it also identifies from the news that in these 5 locations where you had elevated blood levels, there were 5 murders. Now, as a doctor, if you suspect that your patient is a murderer, you have to report that to the police, has artificial intelligence gotten to the point where it's supposed to inform the authorities of this criminality involved with the patient? Thank you.
Very interesting question. Basically, did you meant inform autonomously, I'm assuming? Who wants to take that?
So yeah, I guess I can actually connect one of the questions to the one that you've just posted about the consent and privacy. I guess they kind of come along. So what comes to my mind was an interesting thing. I've heard, I've been at the conference a couple of days ago. It was a clinical research conference, more related to the pharmaceutical industry. And pharmaceutical industry probably is one of the major beneficiaries of, of primary data for the secondary research. And I met some guys from Nashville. They run a biobank, and they are part of the Vanderbilt Health System. And so they've got access as a research institution, kind of, as a biobank and the research arm of the Vanderbilt Health System, to about 3 million patients. And I asked them, so like, what is that? So you asked, so all of those patients who came to this health system for treatment, did they all give consent for research? And they told me, yeah, that there is like a kind of a form in the United States where you can give like an open consent. You just say that that's okay to use my data or my specimen for whatever, for whatever you like, which doesn't exist here, for example. So that brings us to the question. So you give consent today, if you are knowledgeable enough, you understand what research could be done on the data that you provide. Whereas going forward, we don't know what we can come up with, what kind of algorithms are going to be available. So does it compromise, does this kind of open research or open consent thing compromise patient privacy? Because today you understand what you are kind of subscribing to, if you will, but you won't ever know what comes next, right? And this is like quite a significant challenge, and that also kind of connects to the previous conversation that we had about regulation versus innovation. So clearly, open consent is allowing a lot of innovation, right? And we see United States ahead of, for many reasons, but one of those would be this kind of flexibility in terms of doing, providing this open consent, patients easier getting to the clinical trials, right? So that is all available in the United States, whereas here in Europe, we are really restricted in the number of things. Even ourselves, we can't easily get to clinical trials, right? We can't say between us and our general practitioner, we can't decide that we want to try a treatment, which is almost universally available in the United States, right? So you can just yourself Google all the clinical trials that are available and onboard yourself. I mean, I'm oversimplifying, but it does happen, especially if you happen to, I don't know, live in the Massachusetts area or in California. So we've got access to those large academic medical centers, and they're happy to run this research. So yeah, there is some discrimination there, but it's possible from the legislation perspective. So basically, legislation doesn't touch this part. Whereas we're coming back here, to Europe, where what we discuss, healthcare has to be regulated. That was like this is like a common shared understanding here in Europe. And that not only comes from the way that we want to, define the legislation around it, like where we say, hey, patient safety and patient privacy are the cornerstone. And when we, for example, think about secondary use, now we're going back to European health data space. So if we really read the proposal the European Commission put forward 2 months ago about secondary use of data, they proposed as far as a criminal punishment for people, for researchers who can come up with the algorithms which can re-identify patient data. Is it a stretch already? Is it too much? Like, how we can even think that we need a criminal punishment for researchers, just and even in the first place? Yeah, of course we understand that the abuse of data, the re-identification of data, which might be possible indeed today we think that we found out the proper way to de-identify data, but then in 10 years, and we don't know when, obviously there is a chance that there might be an algorithm which would be able to re-identify data. But do we want really to, you know, have all the researchers be scared that they can be, you know, criminally investigated? And those are the things that we probably don't have like a clear answer to. That's like a debatable thing where we want to stop, you know, in terms of privacy, in terms of, you know, open consent things. I don't think that there is any silver bullet today. I don't think that there is like right answer either in the United States or if we do here in Europe is the proper way to over-regulating things, because we may be even over-regulating to a certain extent, right? Because we do have challenges even from the healthcare perspective, right? With this example of a patient being not able individually decide whether he or she wants to try a clinical trial drug for their own treatment, right? So that does sound a little bit of too overcomplicated for us here in Europe.
A good question, of course, Dimitri, but I can ask a counter question. A researcher who develops the re-identification algorithm, doesn't he stop being a researcher and becomes really a hacker or a criminal? Martin, you were next. And then do we want to protect such researchers?
Just as a short answer, in a way, I think all your arguments were exactly right, but this is exactly like the risk of researchers, or the uncertainty of researchers perhaps even going in the direction of re-identifying data. This is exactly what I meant with, in a way, governance for an like broadly accepted platform for this, in a way, depersonalization. So exactly to give this security to all the stakeholders, security for the researchers, but also security for the data providers.
And you wanted to add something?
I wanted to add another layer here. And I've heard a couple of times today, not to be defensive as the clinician, but clinician adoption is quite low of the AI tools. Why is that? So a clinician will readily adopt a new pharmaceutical product because that clinician is informed and it's exceptionally documented what clinical trial data were the results of testing the drug. There is no gold standard methodology for testing any algorithm. So if you did have the clinical trial data on the algorithm, you'd have the transparency of what is the model trying to predict, what data was used to test that model, how is that data different from the data in the population I'm working with, and what results, what level of error could I anticipate? One of our challenges is unless and until we have that gold standard methodology, so any clinician anywhere can look and say, ooh, predictability, accuracy, 96.9%, I'm all in. But the second I see a predictive accuracy of 61.9%, that's a bit better than flipping a coin, right? So I think that, and then that's what, in my mind, where regulation can play a role. So if any algorithm goes into clinical practice and it must meet ethical, explainability, transparency, what data was used, it doesn't really matter if you like the data that's used, it's the transparency of knowing. Is the data used to train that model similar or representative of the population I look after, and therefore it is a reasonable decision to use that data, adopt that algorithm. So for me, it's more about the methodology and how we're doing the double checks in these algorithms, what data we're training it on. Many of them are actually fabricated data. Why? Because you can't get access to real health system data. So you create a data set.
Mock data.
Right. Yeah. There's lots of names. Sorry. Mock data is what I'm getting at. But yeah, our synthetic data set, I mean, every discipline has its own name. But I think that's actually why clinicians say, yeah, well, call me when you actually show me the clinical trial equivalent, and then they can make their own decision, because that's how they're socialized to deliver quality care and be able to explain, why did you give me that particular treatment based on an algorithm prediction of whatever it was. I think it sort of ties some of these.
Yeah, Rajendra. I think Rajendra was.
Oh, no, I was good next.
So there are a couple of parallel discussions going on. By the time I try to analyze what could be the response of one, I find a totally different metaverse coming in. So firstly, to her point that the clinicians would prescribe or adopt a new drug, but not AI, there is a fundamental element of psychology we need to look at. By getting a new drug, I still retain the authority to prescribe it. That is not taken away by the new drug of the pharmaceutical industry. But a new AI will take that decision-making thing from me because it will throw up the diagnosis. Where is my role? I think technology is still trying to convince that, you get 1 or 2 or 3 preferential diagnoses and you take a call. But eventually we know that they will not be in a position, and doctors are skeptical that if we start using it today, tomorrow patient will have a CDS in an EHR and he will find the way to treat himself. So that's one part, that we cannot compare adoption of a CT scan machine or a drug with an AI, because that's the fundamental thing. I think the question that one guy asked about the, motivation of policymakers. So there are 2 ways, when you look from a policymaker standpoint, and I had the chance to work in the industry for a long time and in the government. For the industry, it is clear one word: monetization. And for the government, it is national security. As long as both are not balanced, as sitting on the policymaker seat, I won't decide. So when we looked at Data Privacy Act in India, I said, why should India data be going to US server? No way, block it. We can't allow that. Because on one side, everyone is saying data is new oil, and we are saying, give data freely. It can't happen. You need to be very careful. You cannot have double standards. Would US send the US population data to India? Never. But would they want Indian population data in US? Of course, yes. Won't work. Real intelligence is also around besides artificial intelligence. No policymaker is intelligent deficient. So that's the other one. On the data, I would suggest, and I would send this to you, the Harvard Business Review did an article, a detailed one on data deluge. And I would send that has addressed a lot of issues around data. But fundamentally, data democratization is not happening because of multiple issues. I think even in this room with just 4 people and a small bunch of digitally, I would say, competent and evangelist, we are still not able to arrive to what the basis is going to be. Just think about the whole world, 200 countries, and we are talking of data diplomacy, data democratization. It is not happening for now.
Well, let us speak a little bit about ethics, if I may. So we spoke already earlier about the potential of digital divide. Now let's look at that. And we all know that the digital health, on the one hand, it's called to improve the equality in getting access to healthcare, right? Because that's basically one of the important missions for digital health. On the other hand, aren't we creating, or is there, how significant is the risk of the digital divide? We had earlier a question in the chat, and we already discussed it earlier today, that for example, physicians, it might be even age related, right? They're let's say younger generations of physicians who are more faster adopters of the digital health technology. And the question was in the chat, how about elderly people? How about that divide in the actual consumers and users of digital health, and especially artificial intelligence? How do we bridge that? How do we avoid that divide? Or is there a risk to begin with? Who would like to take that? Rajendra, would you like to?
I can start with it.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that I also kind of bring us back to the recent developments of the European Health Union, and one part of that is the proposal, which is European Health Data Space. But the other part, so during the French presidency term, they came up with what they call digital health ethical principles, and that is, I think, one of the probably positive sides or the upsides of our over-regulated approach to healthcare here. And all of those principles that European Commission, or let's say the French presidency offered to the European Commission, when European Commission was developing the proposal, this European Health Data Space proposal, that all includes all the points that Professor Georgi raised. So the inclusivity is one of the major elements. It's like how we don't discriminate elderly people who are not savvy with technology. So, and what does it actually mean from the practical standpoint? And one of the best, really obvious example they brought up is that if we provide an application for teleconsultation, that there has to be a matching service over telephone. So if we have the application, we can't shut down a call center, or, you know, that would be clearly seen as a discrimination, because in all of the things that we actually try to say, there is a virtual consultation. Do we want to, you know, kind of create the gatekeeping, one of the other gatekeepings in our health system? So today, in a lot of countries, general practitioners are seen as gatekeepers. And they tell you, do you need to go to secondary care? You don't need to go to secondary care. Would that happen the same with virtual care? Would that be a gatekeeper? Would that be one in the only entry point to health system? And French presidency at the time was actually seeing this as discriminative. So we probably do something from the policy standpoint, and we are trying to say, hey, we've got ethics, and we are trying to imply those ethics through the lenses of the policymakers. And I can bring you a kind of an example from the different angle, from the industry perspective. So probably already 5 years ago, we recognized on the genomics, so on the genomic side of things, that we collect a lot of genomic data of the European or Caucasian population. And that genomic data which we collect at large advises majority of the new clinical trials. So it obviously means that most of the newly developed drugs are now in the clinical trials, are biased towards the European population. And that was obvious already for 5 years ago. And I can tell you that 10 years ago, they started one of the projects which is called H3 Africa, which started in South Africa. Across 10 years, there was an investment of about $180 million in order to build sequencing centers in South Africa. And if we look, so 5 years from now, when we've already recognized the problem, 5 years from now, if you look at the graphs, there are interesting research, you know, from Lancet, very recent research from Lancet, which is saying that since the last 5 years, the gap between European sequence data and the rest of the world data increased dramatically, like in 10 or 20 times more. European data today is in the data banks than it was 5 years ago. So we did, on the one hand, recognize the problem. We did make the investments, but if we really look at the data, we just made it even worse.
So as I say, anytime there is a discussion, the new thing comes up. But yeah, very interesting point he made. Now I was trying to understand which part should I answer. See, ethics part, if we have to answer, and the divide part, both are related, both are denominated actually, you know, if you really look at it. So I'll give you an example of top 5 big tech companies, the FAGMA, as we call them, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and, you know, Apple. Look at their valuations during COVID. 2 trillion to 3 trillion market cap in a matter of 1 year. That's what Apple did. Look at all of them. And look at the other side. We had a test of scientific prowess. In less than a year, we were able to get a vaccine for COVID. It was unimaginable. Now that shows that ethics on the science side in terms of committing all that was possible. And trust me, there was no one meeting face to face. COVID was in full rage. Still, vaccine came out. All of us are sitting without masks today. It's thanks to the vaccine, thanks to the science, the ethics in science, they were able to get it. Look at the other side. And I can tell you what went through in India. So Moderna and Pfizer were trying to push through, saying, give us emergency authorization, buy at $30. I said, no, not at all. They tried everything on planet because they saw 1.4 billion people. $30, $20. Why should we? We were able to get it at $1.5. in just a matter of few months. So what ethics are we talking about? It's again relative. Clinicians, they did their best. Scientists, they did the best. Did pharma companies stand up? And now if we talk about ethics and pharma companies and tech companies, there is always a memory in the minds of people with what they read. It's very tough to draw a line that says this is ethics. My worry is that we don't demonstrate when it is needed the most. We try to still see our profits above people. We have never delivered on that. And I think he made a point, which I think all of us in the industry and healthcare should understand. Who is the biggest influencer in healthcare? Any right answers? Is the pharma companies. They have the wherewithal. And if that credibility is at a question mark, the question of ethics in healthcare does not arise at all. We will have all of rules, all of regulations, but those episodes of a drug costing $1 million will always beat everyone out. So I think it is not straightforward answer. I mean, in his point of technology, we have looked at countries like Japan with aging population. Some countries in Europe with aging population, they would need technology, they would need AI, they would need robotics. Other countries will have to define their framework for sustainable automation. So I think it is not a question that can get you one single answer. It will have different answers in different parts of the world, in different levels of age, in different levels of income. So it cuts across. Divide is clear, ethics is unclear.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'm afraid we are running already out of time. We're getting, yes, yeah, we would need another day, only to discuss AI in healthcare. So what I would like us to do now, I would like each of the panelists to just provide us with very brief final remarks, focusing on one question. And I would add to that another very short question. So what I would like you to answer is to say what is one single measure, either a policy measure or technology measure, or what are you really looking forward to in the next years, in the next, let's say, 5 to 10 years, that would lead you to understand that AI in healthcare is really moving forward in the necessary direction. So that is a practical question. And I also would like to have one impractical question to each and every panelist. And by the way, also to the people in the audience. And that is a question: will AI ever replace human doctor? Yes or no? If no, then why? If yes, then when? And we'll start with you. You began and you're concluding.
I was afraid you were going to say that. Let me start with the last one.
Okay.
Will AI ever replace a human doctor? Not a chance. I don't see it. People, like in this room, thrive on engaging with other people. Social isolation is one of the most devastating impacts on health. If we really think AI is going to replace that doctor person across from us, I think that is smoke and mirrors, to be honest. AI's critical role is to augment decision-making, ask the double check, the double checks in the system. Medical error remains a huge issue for us. If AI dropped our medical error down by 10%, 20%, that would save hundreds of thousands of lives. So for me, it's to augment and support and enable our workforce, not replace it. That was the third question. The practical.
Yes. What to do in the next 5 to 10 years, basically, to make it workable?
So
less hype, more efficiency.
I think we have to stop talking about it and start doing it. We've talked a lot about AI. I mean, I was I was working with AI before, anyways, forever, and it's like you have to try it.
Okay.
You have to define. You have to define what you want to solve, and go after it. Solve it. Stop debating. Stop debating it. Just do it. And by doing it, you learn, and it improves, and it moves forward.
Just do it, whatever comes, and come what may. Okay. Thank you very much, Anne.
The only other thing I would say is be very clear on outcomes.
Yeah.
Health systems generally measure transactions. We don't measure outcomes. Who did well, who didn't do well. And that's where the ethics piece plays a role for me. And then if you're going to focus on outcomes, now you've got opportunity for AI because it requires outcomes data to predict accurately.
Martin.
Thanks. Yeah, briefly, I think practical, that brings me back to, I think, one of the main requirements I see, that is the availability of data for secondary use. I think most practically we need an publicly run economic platform for, in a way, the collection, administration, and provision of health data for AI purposes. And that also includes then the governance for, well, ethical and security aspects of the data. Yeah, I think this is, I really see the economic aspect of health data for health AI purposes, I see as most crucial. Yeah, and this leads to effects. I mean, this unavailability leads to effects that, for example, there is a big trade of health data. I know, I mean, that researchers from basically Europe, America, they go to India, to China and buy data simply because it's not in a legal way available here. And this brings all the risks related to, I mean, ethical risks, of course, and also bias. Then data comes from basically unclassified sources. Yeah. So practically, we need a well-governed platform for this data. Yeah, and this is not just a national thing. This, of course, is an international. So it starts with the European approach. Yeah, eHealth, I think, is a good start. But of course, it has to focus then on the secondary use of the data. The next would be then on a global level. I think we had a very interesting presentation from WHO today. Yeah, they mentioned the regional action plan. Well, and of course, this has to become a global action plan regarding the secondary use of health data. Yeah. So, and then regarding would AI replace doctors? Well, to some degree, I mean, I fully actually agree with Anne. Yeah, so AI can already now, but will much more really help to disseminate also clinical knowledge, much more than a single specialist can. Yeah, so I have become, by own experience, I have become a bit skeptical about clinical specialists. Of course, they have their strength in their specialization, but the more specialized the specialist is, the narrower he is basically in basically what he knows. So he can only check a very narrow aspect of myself. And this, I think, is what when I can help. It can look at a much like more holistic perspective of myself. So that is, I think, where I see really a strength of AI. Still, as I'm also quite skeptical in a way, in general, I do not believe that I will fully replace intuition.
Intuition, that is a good word. Rajendra.
So my comments are after office hours. Yeah. So after 5 p.m., but I stand by what I say. See, we are talking of AI's efficacy and accuracy. Have we really checked real doctors' accuracy and efficacy in terms of being the right diagnosis? It will be a horrible experiment to do ever. So having said that, I would say it here that AI would replace doctors. It has already replaced doctors. So robotics is about AI. You know, they have, and I guess less than a decade it will. And one of the most important cognitive tasks is writing a novel. If an AI can win an award, and I quote that in one of the book, why do you think they will not replace a clinically backed science? Of course they will. That's the first part. So I am completely in agreement. In less than a decade, we will have that answer, and it will be yes. Those who are in disagreement, despite being after office hours, so I will put this another quote of mine. So doctors who use digital health will replace doctors who don't. Yeah, so they will have to use. That's the second one. And your next part, I'm sorry, my AI is going down right now. What's the next?
Oh, yes, it's
yeah.
Not a
so yeah, got it.
The practical one.
Yeah, the practical part is I would still say that, you know, go back to basics. If you're able to get AI in primary care settings with frontline health workers, I think you have done a good job. And that's where we need them the most for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rajendra. Dimitri, will AI replace human doctors?
So yeah, I
not?
probably lean towards Rajendra's point of view. Yes, it will replace, and I'm a fan of, Philip K. Dick and all other, dystopian literature. So yeah, we're gonna have probably Android type of people, and if that is kind of possible. So obviously, you know, changing a function which would serve still if this social function. So I guess the only question here is that will we be able to address that social demand, you know, in the conversation, if that conversation will be empathetic enough, you know, and I think that we've got enough non-empathetic people, right? So we probably would prefer to talk to an empathetic robot rather than, you know, a non-empathetic human being. So maybe not in a decade, maybe it will take a little more time, but function by function, I guess some of the very basic operations are already, you know, like for example, those kind of what is called kind of triage systems, or those gatekeeping applications, that symptom checkers and all those sort of things, they already help, right? And they already offload a lot of burden in some health systems that are trying to onboard those possibilities. Some see them as gatekeepers, some say, yeah, they are actually substituting some of the functions of clinicians. And if I kind of have been practical, so, and again, representing software industry here, I can say that we are very different from pharmaceutical or medtech industry. And our major risk is that we are not used to this level of stringent regulation. And what we really need in order to, for ourselves to plan, to invest, to build, you know, capacity, talent, is actually the transparency and predictability from the policymakers. If we don't know what is the new policy law going to come up tomorrow, we won't be able to invest in. And we probably are the only ones who are investing. And we can't predict today that in order for bringing in new EHR function and AI algorithm as part of our application, we need to go through the same, for example, 10 years certification or clinical trial process as the pharma industry goes through. That's impossible, right? It's just going to kill the software industry. So we need to be careful about this type of overregulation and just give us a little bit of predictability and transparency when you start, you know, when you think of the next policy that you want to impose on the industry.
Sure, all right. And you give us better algorithms, of course.
I commit to that.
The same question to the audience. Just last 1 minute. Yes, sure.
So I just leave you with one statement, which is a reality today. Today, software is a drug. Germany prescribes them, US does. Software is a medical device. Why do you think software will not be a doctor?
Thank you so much. So who in the audience, by the way, thinks that AI will sometime in the future, I don't know when, yes, will eventually replace a human doctor? Who thinks like that in the audience? Yeah, raise your hands. Okay. And who thinks that AI will never, ever replace human doctors? Not in 50 years, not in 100 years, not in 150 years. Okay, so we see even in our audience on site, and I believe it's going to be the same online, we can see that we probably would not be able to answer this question or pretty much any such complex question absolutely unequivocally. But I have to say that fog in Fakishin has cleared somewhat thanks to our brilliant panelists. They were able to clean the fog by providing us with their excellent remarks and thoughts on artificial intelligence in healthcare and where it is really leading, taking us, quo vadis. And I think we had a very stimulating discussion. I think it was an excellent closure of the day, and I invite everyone to give an incredible round of applause to our panelists. Ladies and gentlemen, on that, I think we will be closing the DigiHealth Day 2022. I will not take you more than a few minutes because we've been here, you know, for basically about 10 hours already, 9.5 hours. And it's been quite a long day for everyone. I know that we are all now very much looking forward